The walk toward Arthur Ashe Stadium will be about more than tennis. Picture it for a second. More than 23,000 seats, the lights, the noise, the cameras, the largest stage in the sport, and a young Filipina stepping onto the court carrying a symbol that means far more than the logo on her chest. Alex Eala is preparing for a moment unlike anything Filipino tennis has seen before, and when she walks into the 2026 US Open wearing Nike's royal blue design, fans will not simply be looking at a tennis outfit. They will be looking for the details. The flower, the message, the connection to home. The Sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, has quietly become part of the visual story surrounding Eala's rise, appearing in the details that fans noticed long before much of the tennis world understood why they mattered. And that is what makes this moment so powerful. This was a really nice gesture from Nike. It's so sentimental to be able to wear, Eala said, and those words explain something that statistics and rankings cannot. For Eala, where she comes from is not a marketing angle added after success. It is part of her identity. Of course, it's a huge reason as to who I am. I think where I come from is a big part of who I am. That identity is now being carried onto some of the biggest stages in world tennis, and as the US Open approaches, the timing could hardly be more dramatic. In the days leading into the tournament, Nike revealed its new Court Slam collection, including the royal blue dress associated with its 2026 US Open campaign. At the same time, Eala was building momentum on the North American hard courts, adding another layer of excitement to a season that has already transformed the way fans, brands, and media outlets look at her. The story is no longer simply about a promising young player from the Philippines. The question is becoming much bigger. Is Nike beginning to build an entire tennis identity around Alex Eala? To understand why that question is even being asked, you have to go back and look at the pieces that came before the royal blue dress. It started with something incredibly small, but incredibly meaningful. At Wimbledon, on one of the most traditional and tightly controlled stages in tennis, Eala appeared with a custom white hair accessory featuring the Sampaguita. To many casual viewers, it may have looked like a simple detail, but Filipino fans noticed immediately. The national flower was there, visible on center court, attached to a player carrying the hopes of an entire tennis community that had spent years waiting for someone like her to arrive. The symbolism became impossible to ignore. This was not simply Nike putting its athlete in another standard outfit. The design was speaking directly to Eala's background, her country, and the audience that had followed her long before the international spotlight became this intense. Then came another powerful moment. The visor, carrying a Tagalog phrase that resonated deeply with Filipino supporters. Hindi hihinto, a message associated with continuing, moving forward, refusing to stop. During the Wimbledon broadcast, the meaning was translated for a global audience. Once it grows, it cannot be stopped. Suddenly, something deeply connected to Filipino identity was being presented on one of the most internationally recognized broadcasts in tennis. For fans watching from Manila, Toronto, Dubai, Los Angeles, and everywhere else across the Filipino diaspora, it was more than a fashion detail. It was recognition. Tennis had always been a global sport, but for a moment, the language and symbols of the Philippines were standing directly in the middle of one of its most historic arenas. Eala herself represented that connection. The phrase was not just something designed to look good on television. It reflected the journey behind her rise. Because nothing about Alex Eala's path has been automatic. Before the rankings climbed, before the major media attention, before the fashion campaigns and the growing global audience, there were losses, difficult draws, questions about consistency, and the pressure of carrying expectations that no Filipino woman had carried before at this level of the sport. That is what gives the Sampaguita its meaning. It is not a decoration attached to success after the fact. It represents where the journey began. Nike's growing connection with that story became even more visible when the collaboration expanded beyond the court. A capsule inspired by Filipino identity brought the Sampaguita into apparel and merchandise, while Manila-based creative talent became part of the visual process. That decision mattered because there is a difference between designing something for a culture and creating something with people from that culture. The message behind the collection centered on growth, discipline, courage, and blooming in your own time, ideas that fit Eala's career almost perfectly. Her rise has never followed a straight line. Every breakthrough has been followed by another challenge. Every major victory has created another level of expectation. Yet the trajectory has continued upward, and the more her profile has grown, the more visible the connection between her tennis career and her Filipino identity has become. That is why the timing of the US Open collection is so interesting. A royal blue Nike Court Slam dress appearing as Eala enters one of the most important stretches of her career is more than just a new piece of equipment. Nike outfits multiple athletes, of course, and a dress does not automatically mean a signature collection. But in elite sports, perception matters. Imagery matters. Timing matters. And when one player is repeatedly placed at the center of a visual conversation, fans naturally begin asking whether something bigger is developing behind the scenes. Eala's growing presence inside the Nike world has only intensified that speculation. Her visit to Nike headquarters in Beaverton became another moment that supporters interpreted as a sign of how seriously the company may be viewing her future. Images of her career moments, her connection with the brand, and the attention surrounding the visit created the feeling that this was more than an ordinary sponsorship stop. It looked like a relationship entering a new chapter. That does not mean every prediction from fans will automatically become reality, and the difference between speculation and an official announcement always matters. But the reason the conversation exists is obvious. Alex Eala has something that cannot be manufactured overnight: a rapidly growing sporting story connected to a massive and deeply passionate audience. The Philippines is watching. The global Filipino diaspora is watching. And as her career reaches bigger stages, those audiences are becoming increasingly visible inside tennis venues themselves. Toronto offered one of the clearest examples. Filipino flags, chants, packed sections, and a level of emotional investment that made it clear Eala's matches were becoming events rather than simply another name on the schedule. This is the so-called Eala effect that supporters have been talking about for months. A player's ranking tells one story. The atmosphere surrounding that player tells another. And brands understand the difference. Nike is operating in a tennis landscape very different from the one dominated for years by Serena Williams and Rafael Nadal. Those athletes were more than champions. They were cultural forces. Their presence helped define eras of tennis marketing. The challenge for any major sports company is what comes next when generational icons eventually leave the center of the stage. There are extraordinary players across the tours, Grand Slam champions, world number ones, and established stars. But sporting success alone does not always create cultural connection. A signature athlete needs something more. They need a story people want to follow. They need an audience that feels emotionally connected. They need recognizability, personality, and a sense that what happens next could become bigger than a single match. This is where Alex Eala's rise becomes fascinating. She entered the conversation without the traditional profile of a global tennis superstar. She was not born into one of tennis's biggest established markets. She did not arrive with multiple Grand Slam titles. But what she did have was something increasingly valuable, a national story waiting to explode onto the international stage. Every new achievement carried historic weight. Every ranking milestone created a first. Every major match became an opportunity for a new audience to discover her. And the more people discovered her, the more they understood that Eala was not simply playing for herself in the imagination of her supporters. She had become a symbol of possibility. That symbolism had already been visible during difficult moments, not just victories. In 2025, Eala experienced the emotional highs and lows that define a young player trying to establish herself at the highest level. A breakthrough could be followed by a painful defeat. A historic result could quickly give way to another lesson. Yet the symbol remained. The Sampaguita was still there as a reminder of where she came from and why the journey mattered. That is what gives the current Nike story its emotional foundation. The flower did not suddenly appear because success became fashionable. It was part of the identity before the latest surge, before the hottest weeks on the North American swing, before the US Open attention reached this level. Now, as her career continues to move upward, that same symbol is becoming visible to more people than ever before. And that is where the phrase on the visor takes on another meaning. Once it grows, it cannot be stopped. Whether you see that as a description of Eala's tennis, her fanbase, or her growing commercial potential, the message feels increasingly relevant. Just 12 months can completely change the position of a player in professional tennis. A year ago, the questions surrounding Eala were about whether she could consistently challenge the top level. Now the conversation has expanded to rankings, seeding, major draws, marketing campaigns, international attention, and the possibility of becoming one of the most influential athletes the Philippines has ever produced. That transformation did not happen because of one dress or one photograph. The Nike visuals are the result of a larger journey. The tennis came first. The results created attention. The attention brought opportunities. And now the opportunities are amplifying the story even further. That is why the next few weeks are so important. Cincinnati represents another opportunity. Flushing Meadows represents an even bigger one. The US Open is not simply another tournament on the calendar. It is one of the loudest sporting stages in the world. A deep run there can transform the public perception of a player almost overnight. A first trip into the second week, a major victory over a top opponent, or a run toward the quarterfinals could introduce Eala to millions of people who have not yet followed every stage of her journey. And if she arrives on those courts, wearing a design already connected in the minds of fans to her Filipino identity, the visual impact could be enormous. Every photograph would carry the story. The royal blue outfit, the Nike logo, the Sampaguita connection, the Philippine flags in the stands. The player from Manila walking into Arthur Ashe Stadium with the possibility of making history again. That is how sports stories become cultural moments. But there is still an important reality underneath all of the excitement. Eala has to play the matches. Nike can create the imagery. Fans can create the atmosphere. Social media can create the conversation. But professional tennis eventually brings everything back to the court. One opponent at a time. One set at a time. One pressure moment at a time. That is what makes this next chapter so compelling. The hype is growing, but so is the challenge. The expectations are rising, but so is the level of competition. If Nike is betting on Alex Eala's future, the strongest answer she can give will not come from a campaign. It will come from the scoreboard. And perhaps that is exactly why the symbolism around her feels so appropriate. The Sampaguita represents growth, but growth is not instant. It takes time. It survives difficult conditions. It continues. Eala's career has followed that same pattern. There have been setbacks. There have been moments when the excitement seemed ahead of the results. There have been losses that reminded everyone how unforgiving professional tennis can be. But the direction has continued upward. The player who once arrived at major tournaments simply hoping to prove she belonged is now entering events with expectations attached to her name. That is a completely different kind of pressure. And yet it is also proof of how far she has come. So when Alex Eala steps onto the court during this next chapter of her career, do not look only at the score. Look at the details. Look at what she is wearing and why it matters. Look at the flags in the crowd. Listen to the chants. Remember the hair accessory on center court. Remember the Tagalog words broadcast to the world. Remember the creative voices from Manila becoming part of a global sports brand. Remember that the journey did not begin with the royal blue dress. It began much earlier, with a young player carrying the dream of competing with the best in the world and representing a country that had rarely seen itself reflected at this level of women's tennis. Now that reflection is becoming impossible to ignore. Whether Nike eventually makes an official move towards something even bigger remains to be seen, and only the company can confirm what the future of the partnership will be. But the momentum surrounding Alex Eala is real. The audience is growing. The story is expanding. And the stages are getting bigger. From Wimbledon to Toronto, from Cincinnati to New York, every stop now feels like another chapter in something that is moving faster than many people expected. Maybe that is why the phrase, "once it grows, it cannot be stopped," feels less like a slogan and more like a warning to the rest of the tennis world. Alex Eala is no longer a secret waiting to be discovered. She is no longer simply a promising player from the Philippines hoping for recognition. She is becoming one of the most compelling stories in women's tennis, and with every victory, every historic moment, and every new symbol of home she carries onto the court, the distance between her and global superstardom becomes smaller. The next question is how far this can go. Will the US Open become the tournament where Eala takes another massive step forward? Will a deep run force even more attention toward the Philippines? Will Nike eventually take the relationship to the next level and formally build something bigger around one of the sport's fastest rising names? Those answers are still waiting on the other side of the draw. But one thing is already clear. When the lights come on, when Arthur Ashe Stadium fills, and when Alex Eala walks onto that court wearing royal blue, she will not be walking alone. She will carry the dreams of fans in Manila and across the world. She will carry the history of every milestone that came before. And somewhere in the details will be the symbol that has followed her through victory and defeat alike, the Sampaguita, a reminder of where she comes from and perhaps a sign of where the story is going. The world may have only recently started paying attention, but Filipino fans know they have been watching the growth from the beginning. And now, as the biggest stages of tennis prepare for Alex Eala's arrival, the question is no longer whether people will notice. The question is whether they are ready for what happens next.